Hey, deserving listeners, a few of you have been asking me to react to the apology video by Linus Sebastian of Linus Tech. So let's watch. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Let's see what grade he gets. But first, I found this summary by Christopher Yee, who is going to summarize the situation.
Explaining, to be clear, this isn't drama. If you've ever purchased consumer tech, like a gaming laptop, computer parts, a gaming console, mice, headphones, etc., then you need to pay attention. The review videos that you watch before you buy those products come from these creators.
Yeah, I've been watching Linus Tech, I think, every now and then, maybe once every 6 months or something, for several years. I feel like Linus was one of the very first YouTubers that really went into depth on tech things, computer stuff. I've built my own computers, so I'm sure I came across some of the Linus Tech stuff. I don't know much about, I think some people watch the Linus videos a lot. It's like something that they watch every day. So I think that is a factor here, because I think for the fans, they feel betrayed, I think, by Linus based on what happened.
For his product reviews. Now, I don't know what prompted this person to have an ego about benchmarking and testing, because inherently, it's not that cool. And on top of all that, it's not a competition. The point of testing a product for a review video is to give potential consumers a better idea of what it is they're gonna get and overall help them make a more informed decision. Throwing shade at other channels in the industry and implying that you're better just makes you seem egotistical, cocky, and probably insecure.
Okay, so I think this is something that is over my head. I'm already a little confused. I think for people that work in the industry or are amateur followers of these sorts of things, tech, of computers and this sort of thing, I'm guessing this resonates with them. But for me, I'm like, huh? And I've actually built all my desktops. The desktop I'm using right now is something that I built. Not to say that this computer that I built during the pandemic, I'm not saying it didn't catch on fire when I was powering it up, because it did. I had wired things wrongly. So motherboards are a lot more complicated now than they were 10, 20 years ago. I fixed it. It no longer catches on fire, but I'm someone that probably knows more than the average person about this sort of thing. But I'm a little confused as to so what they're saying, what Christopher E is saying, and I do remember hearing this from the drama discourse, that the claims made by the Linus team were denigrating other review channels on the internet, which isn't probably going to go over well with the other creators.
What have simply been said is that we do a good job. Because I assume if that had been said, it wouldn't have prompted Steve from Gamers Nexus to keep his pimp hand strong and make a 44-minute video detailing why Linus Media Group isn't doing a good job. As a matter of fact, he more or less implied that they were doing a shit job. And for those of you who are confused, when I say Linus Media Group, I am referring to Linus Tech Tips. His brand is so big and they have so many channels now that we're just going to call it all Linus Media.
Okay, so the drama apparently was that another creator that maybe felt indicted by that claim that was randomly filmed by, I think, either Christopher Yee or someone else that was on a tour. It wasn't like an official video that they were putting out. Someone captured a tour guide saying these kinds of things. It's still official statements made by someone employed by the business. And then another creator decided to, scrutinize what this claim was saying and was poking holes in the Linus Tech Media Group in terms of the quality of the advice or the testing that they were doing.
There's a fair number of people that are talking about the whole Trust Me Bro situation, where there were some creators that it seems like you guys are... Look.
So I remember thinking this. I do remember seeing this as it was developing, little bits and pieces. I didn't exactly know what was going on, but the one thing I did note as this drama was unfolding, when these sorts of, because it wasn't just this video, Linus had a number of statements that were in response to the drama that was building. And I remember thinking, and I'm reminded seeing this, and I don't know the landscape. If I could hear from Linus, maybe he'd say, well, da-da-da-da, but I remember thinking that his demeanor was too defensive. And again, I didn't know the landscape, so I can't really tell, but you can sort of see it. And I think this added to the drama and people being upset at him because the way he comes across, it doesn't seem like he's open. And as someone who makes a lot of content on the internet that I'm guessing is a lot more controversial than the kind of stuff that they talk about. I mean, I get into literally every controversial, or I don't know, the majority of controversial topics within psychology, which includes a lot of different topics. And I've been attacked in a variety of ways. And yeah, I've had, but off camera, I've had a lot of varied reactions. Some of them not very mature or refined, but I don't film it. But I feel like a lot of people these days, and it kind of looks like that's what this is, it's a lot of off-the-cuff things. Like I can imagine for Linus, he's very busy, I'm guessing, and that is, I think, part of the big drama is that he pushes himself too hard, which maybe I'll get into later because I can kind of relate to that as well. That he probably just sits down and someone else is taking care of the video and the audio, and he just talks off the cuff. And that's a recipe for disaster. If you don't have a system in your mind or someone right next to you that says, don't go into that, because you're not in an emotional place where you can actually speak to this in a way that isn't going to cause more problems. I remember thinking that about Linus. It's like, ooh, and then I was wondering if this is something about his personality, because he did it a number of times, that like a streak in him that is very defensive. And now that I think about it, this is a total stereotype, and I acknowledge that. But people who work in tech, IT professionals, right? Sometimes in my anecdotal experience, I have run into situations where meaning, we're talking about millions of people, but I've worked with IT. At my university, we had an IT person, Irina, who never did this. She was always patient with me. Literally, when I would bring my laptop to her and I would say, something's wrong, and she would literally just turn it on. I'd be like, oh. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but it was things like that. And she was always nice, and you just imagine the kind of annoyances that she would run into at a university. For a long time, while I was working a lot with Irina, I was one of the youngest professors at Antioch, and I was 40 years old around the time that I'm thinking. And most of the professors were in their 60s and 70s. So, let's just imagine the kind of questions that she would get. So, not everyone, but I've worked with other IT people that when I go to them with a question, they get angry at me, and I'm just like, I'm sorry, but could you please help me with this? And they're like, oh, did you try this? Did you, this difficulty with their emotions, and I don't know, I'd have to look up the research, and I don't know if there is any around, I'm guessing there is, around personality trends and maybe trauma trends that are common maybe among people that work in IT. Because we could imagine a pathway for an individual who might have some difficulty with socializing or have been through some traumas with bullying or something, and they like to work on their own. It's easier for them to do that. Again, I'm stereotyping, it is billions of people. So you could argue I worked in IT in a sense because at my university, because I was young and I guess a guy, and I guess because I'm Asian, I got identified as the professor who knew about computers, even though I didn't know that much. I just knew a lot more than these other professors did. And so they'd come to me with things. So, you could argue. And I'll admit that I could get annoyed sometimes and mean. My mom will ask me questions about her phone or her computer, and I have to remind myself, stay patient. She's not trying to annoy you. Just be nice. And I've been a jerk sometimes. I think there's just something kind of about that work, maybe. Anyway, but you could also imagine a certain personality type being attracted. I'm sure all y'all have friends, or maybe you're one of these people who just likes to work by yourself, introverted, or have difficulty socializing in one way or another. And so you end up in tech, and then you start learning more and more. And maybe Linus, although he seems to be pretty able socially, but maybe there's some streak there, or it's within the culture of tech or something. Anyway, let me know in the comments what you think of what I'm saying here, because I don't want to denigrate anyone. But the way that Linus talks, and I'll remind this, I remember thinking, this is kind of reminding me of conversations I've had with other IT people. I don't know. It's terrible for me to say. I know that I'm being wrong. I'm just saying I wondered that. But I'm sure that... Anyway, let's run that.
Some creators that... It seems like you guys are... Look. It's pretty clear that not everyone in the creator space handled that super professionally.
So you can hear it, right? And maybe he's right. I don't know. And maybe, Christopher, you will help us with this. But it comes across as defensive, as maybe unpolished, unprofessional, and maybe arrogant, right? I'm guessing if he could rewind the clock, he would have something more professional to say, more diplomatic, something like, hey, you know, maybe the things that we said were a little over the top, and a lot of great creators are out there doing really good work, and so we don't want to put them down. You know, just something like that. It would be hard to say, and maybe he did, but it seems like the overall message wasn't that.
Essentially, what Steve is claiming is that Linus Media Group rushes their content by giving themselves arbitrary and self-imposed deadlines. He argues that these deadlines are not necessary.
We believe LTT or LMG is rushing too much to hit arbitrary and largely self-imposed deadlines.
He drives home this point multiple times throughout the...
Now, I do know that once we get to the apology video, the workers at Linus Tech, or the media group, agree with that they were working too fast, and maybe it was engineered by Linus because of his workaholism or his constant, and I watched a little bit of the apology video already, and someone was saying, I've been trying to get Linus to slow down for a long time, and Linus has not been slowing down. And then Linus, I think, later says, I will slow down. And it was in that moment that I did relate, because there's something about being a content provider. For many, many years, barely anyone was paying attention to me. I built a very small audience very slowly over years and years and years and years, and no one really cared about what was happening. I could, for example, not put out an episode one week, and I don't know if anyone would notice. Maybe a few people would, but it wouldn't be this big thing. Then I started to get some success. We'll skip that middle phase. And then I got a lot of success, and I mean, not a lot, but a lot for me. And I started to move away from my jobs at the university and in my private practice as a clinician into just making content. And so I'm self-employed, and I'm more and more dependent on the money that comes in from being a content provider. Eventually, I semi-retired from my university and really shrunk my practice very, very small. So it was scary and terrifying, because at the university, I got a paycheck. I was on a salary with my clients. I knew the regularity of the client work and the money. I have bills to pay. I have my rent or mortgage, or payments on my car. My wife started to pull away from her other work. And so it was terrifying to just walk into the void and hope that everything works out okay. And that anxiety can cause it caused me, to work and work and work and work and work, because the more content you put out, the more money you make. Also, when you do that sort of thing, people want more, right? They start to ask for, oh, could you do this? Ooh, could you do that? And I'm the sort of person that says, well, if that's what they want, then I'll do that. And it would cause me to work even more. And I was working 70, 80 hours a week. And I liked it. That was another problem, was that there was no checks and balances, because I actually liked making the content. So I wonder if for Linus, as his business grew, and his business grew 1,000 times bigger than mine ever did. I mean, he has a number of employees, like this huge warehouse. They have to get all this equipment for testing. I mean, it's just this whole thing, right? And you just imagine the compulsion to just work more and make more channels and, you know, keep moving down that road, and people asking him, you know, you got to do this and you got to go into this area and you got to, and that's what it sounds like, is that he was working too much. And I think two things happened. It sounds like one was he was imposing that anxiety on the workers such that they were not given enough time to fully test these things, right? And Linus was like, "No, we got to keep moving." You know, I think he'll get to this. That eventually Linus says something like, "If I gave everyone as much time as they wanted, all my employees, if I gave them as much time as they wanted, we would never put out any videos because they want to test and test and test and test. And you know, at some point we got to put out the content because it's not monetarily sensible to allow someone to test something for 3 months and only put out a 20-minute video. It'll cost too much to spend that amount of time." He didn't use that specific, but that's kind of what I was hearing. Or there's some kind of line there where you need to cut off the employee in terms of time so that you can actually make a profit. And, you know, I imagine that it would be kind of hard to make a profit on this because there's not a huge audience for this sort of thing. There's enough. Also, the kinds of things they're testing are kind of micro tech things, right? It's not like they're testing the new Xbox or PlayStation or something. So, you know, it seems like he was pushing the employees. Also, I think he was probably work and so anxiety driven, seemingly, that he ended up forgetting why he got into this. Maybe. He started to prioritize the bottom line too much. And people that own businesses, that's a primary feeling, you know. And I think if you've never been in that position, if you've never been like an upper manager or an owner of a business like myself, from the outside, it can look like, what's wrong with Linus? What's going on with this person? You know, he's a jerk. But all I see is a terrified business owner that has been socialized maybe early in his career when there was more reason to be afraid, to just constantly 24/7 be driven to produce and get secure because you never know what's going to happen in the future. And it sounds like Linus is realizing, you know what, maybe I don't need to be freaking out. I don't think he uses the word anxiety though, but I wish that he had. But we'll get to his video in a second.
Video, and argues that it is the main reason that has caused all the sloppy work and misinformation that has been showcased in the LMG videos as of recently. Now, LMG has over 120 employees, and collectively throughout all of their channels, they put out 25 plus videos per week.
Yeah, so it gives you an idea of the scale of this business. I mean, Linus, I can relate to him because at some point, because of the growth of my business as a content provider, there was a point where a lot of people were advising me, and I was also thinking that I should start hiring more and more people to do social media things, people to make maybe even other channels, people to edit, people to write scripts, and that's the typical course for channels as they grow. And I did a little bit of that and found that it just created more work and more anxiety, and it made it less fun for me because now I'm managing people and I'm getting involved in content provision that really isn't the core of the enjoyment for me. And I reached this Y in the road. And plus, there were a lot of other businesses and startups that were actually asking me to be a part owner and be involved with them, that were big money making opportunities, this kind of thing. And everyone was telling me, do not pass up that opportunity or that set of opportunities because that's a wonderful opportunity. And, you know, so I'm like, okay. And if I hadn't really known myself, because, you know, I'm 52, I've gotten to know who I am. But if I was younger, I'm guessing I wouldn't have really known who I am. I would have actually taken that path, and I would have been miserable. And so what I actually did was I said, no, I'm going to keep this thing small, literally a mom and pop operation. And yeah, I'm not going to make more money because of that. And I'm not going to be able to pump out as much content because of that. I might disappoint some customers because of that, because I can't make everything that I want to make. And that's the way I want it to be. That's the perfect zone where I'm making a living, but also still enjoying it. It's sustainable in the long term. So I wonder if he had to give something up, something in his soul that gave him the reason why he did this thing, and by giving that up, he lost sight of why he was doing this, and then it led to him pushing his employees
poorly on his live stream.
It's bad because it makes absolutely no sense and nobody should buy it.
He basically responded by saying even if the temperatures were lower, at the end of the day, it wouldn't change the general recommendation of the product, which is no one should buy it. It's an $800 water block.
Okay, so this is going over my head again, but there was apparently a review of a particular water cooling thing for CPUs, I believe, and he tested it wrong and got frustrated with it and claimed that it was a bad product, even though it was his fault. And then when he was confronted about it, instead of saying, well, maybe I didn't test it right, I don't know, we need to maybe test it again, or I'm going to have another team test it, or, instead of maybe doing some diplomacy, he just gets defensive, which I think is maybe a problem for Linus, or for everyone, really. But I think part of the problem, because I can get defensive, is that Linus speaks off the cuff and doesn't think, okay, I haven't really thought this through in terms of how the audience is going to take this, even though I feel like, and we can use this as a jumping off point. Defensiveness is a major problem in our lives, not only online, but in your marriage, in your long-term relationship, in your families, at work, in politics. Defensiveness is a massive problem. We all are narcissistic in that, in terms of one type of narcissism. We're all self-centered. And when we are being confronted with something, our knee-jerk reaction almost all the time is to believe the other person is stupid and we're right. And if we stay in that position, it's normal to have that impulse, but if we stay there, then we run into a lot of problems, right? If it's easier to identify it from the other side when you go to your partner or someone at work, or you're a customer and you go to the manager and you get defensiveness from them. You're presenting, and maybe you're even presenting it in a nice way. You could be like, hey, I don't want to be mean, but I just want to say that there's a fly in my soup. So could you give me another bowl of soup? You're at a restaurant. And the cook or whatever, what are you talking about? Defensiveness, it's normal. A lot of the Karen videos that you can watch on the internet are just that people get defensive and then conflict escalates, people get really upset. Another example of this is the videos where the cart narc guy, the guy who goes through parking lots and identifies people who haven't put their cart away, and then he puts a sticker on the car. The ones that he posts are the people who get defensive. And, every time I see these videos, because he's been on the internet for a long time, I and a lot of people in the comment section are just like, why are these people getting so defensive? Why don't they just say, oh, my bad, I'm sorry, and then they, just put the cart away instead, because what's happening is people are at the grocery store, they just leave the cart in the parking spot and drive away, and then this cart narc guy goes up and says, oh, you're a cart lazy person. I don't know what he has a whole shtick, but the people, not only do they say, F you, and but they get really, really angry, just irate, violent sometimes, because this guy is just saying, hey, you're supposed to put the cart back. And sometimes people are littering, and he will criticize them for that as well. And they just go ballistic, and you're just thinking, so it's a normal reaction. And I think Linus had this very normal reaction, and maybe because he just has never run into this before, or he doesn't have people around him to help him with this, or it's a particular problem for him around defensiveness, he let it shine through and he didn't make up for it. It's one thing if he got defensive and then later came out about the cooling system and was just like, you know what, I was being defensive earlier. I mean, that's all he had to say. but apparently he didn't.
block, then let him. Furthermore, Linus states that he could have had employees go back and test the video properly, but it would have cost him several $100s across multiple employees' time.
I don't know, guys. I'm not sure if I can apologize for not spending another $100, $200, $300, $500 of various people's time sitting and engineering a workaround to a product that no matter the result, nobody should buy.
So you hear the defense. Now, maybe he has reasons to say this, but I think he didn't. I think during and after the other people were saying that these claims he was making about the coolant system were just flat out wrong. And for him to be a tech guru and to be at the head of this team of tech gurus, for someone to seemingly emotionally be reviewing things instead of scientifically, objectively reviewing things, you could see how that would be a problem. Plus, I don't know if it comes across to you this way, but it comes across to me as arrogant and dismissive. The way he says, I don't know, guys. It's even if he's right, it just comes across like, ugh, like it feels, I don't know, superior or something. So, and especially if he's wrong in this moment and has had time to think about that, there's just a lack of diplomacy. Let's rewatch that.
I don't know, guys. I'm not sure if I can apologize for not spending another $100, $200, $300, $500 of.
There's so many other ways he could have said this. So let me role play. He could have said something like, yeah, well, I hear people's criticism of this, and maybe I was wrong. And so with this role play, I'm going to actually stick to because he's trying to run a business and he doesn't feel that it's a sound business choice to invest more money in paying a bunch of employees and paying rent for a warehouse, part of it, to test this thing that he believes is not worth it, the time. So let's just stick with that. And he could say, yeah, well, I hear people, and it's possible that I messed up the test. But at this point, given the budgetary issues that we're facing, I just don't feel like I can review it completely. I gave it a shot, and maybe I made a mistake. I drew a conclusion that I didn't think it was worth it. But I don't know. Let's see what other creators are saying, other people are saying. And I kind of just want to move on from it because I don't want to dwell on this one item. So maybe I should take that video down and just say our test was inconclusive because I was frustrated. And so he just could have said something like that. But instead, it's dismissive. It's like in this moment, he's basically saying, yeah, maybe I should spend money to have it properly reviewed, but I don't want to, so back off. It kind of has that vibe, right? So there's just a lot of other ways that he could have, kept to his plan to not spend the money while just having a different kind of demeanor with people. And as someone that has to make those choices as a content provider, because, people think of me as wholesome, but, off camera, I'm just a regular human being. And so I try to not, be a jerk face on camera because it's uncool to be that way to people. If you could edit yourself and control the kinds of things that are out there, you probably don't want this sort of stuff to be out there. You probably want your best foot forward, and you just imagine. Now, maybe for Linus, this is a buildup of a lot of things, which I could imagine. I could imagine that if Linus could catalog and make a case for the amount of, obscenely negative things that are being said about him, because, if you're on the internet, you get that kind of thing. And at a certain point, maybe years ago, he just decided in his mind emotionally that for him to cope, he could not regard people's opinion from the outside. He would just shut himself off, and I've been there too. It takes a toll. It's weird how much it takes a toll. I'm a confident, well-adjusted person. I was raised pretty well. I have good self-esteem, and yet when I get this occasional attack in the comment section or in an email or something, it just ruins my day. It just completely throws me. And I think what a lot of people will say is, well, you got to have a thick skin. And obviously the good creators, they have thick skins. I've never met an actual creator when I would talk with them who actually had a thick skin. They have a system to it. Like, they might disregard all comments. They might not even read the comments. They might cry themselves to sleep every night, but they're ashamed of themselves. They might drink themselves into numbness all the time or something like that. They might frantically try to please everyone. I've never met anyone who could convince me that they are exposing themselves to all the comments, including the negative ones, and everything is fine for them emotionally. I've never been convinced of that. And I feel like people assume that that's what's happening, but that, like, I always bring up the example of Conan O'Brien because he's very successful. He's had a long career, and people love him, including myself. They've even made a Lego figure of him that I have behind me. I don't know if you can see it. And he's been hugely successful for 25, 30 years, maybe longer, 35 years. And yet, for him, he cannot read reviews or comments on his podcast or his TV show. Because, and he talks about this on his podcast, that it ruins his life. Someone that is that successful can read one comment or review that's negative about him, and it will destroy him. It'll just completely ruin his week. And he's been through a lot of therapy himself. And I bring that up because I am suspicious of creators or people that claim that creators who can just cope with it. Now, maybe there's a personality type that can. Someone who is so narcissistic or on the spectrum where they just, but those individuals are usually coping by telling themselves that they're superior when deep down they believe fully that they are not, they are actually inferior is what they believe. So that doesn't really fit. It might look from the outside and they might be consciously saying to themselves everything's fine. So it's possible that for Linus, he has had many years of that onslaught and hasn't developed a system. For me, I've developed a system of emotionally coping and also communicating with the audience so that people are less likely to misunderstand me. I have people that work for me who will protect me from certain kinds of things, to use, certain kind of measures to help me avoid being exposed to certain things, while still telling me what's happening. It's been several years of me cobbling together this system, because there were times when I can't be in contact with any of it, because if I am in contact with it, I'll get triggered. So I've reached this point now where I can be in contact with it, which I want to be. Really, it's a huge part of the enjoyment of making content is actually having that two-way conversation. But I have very robust, complicated systems to avoid me being harmed in those ways. And I wonder if Linus has that system. I don't know. I imagine that he doesn't. And I wonder if what we're seeing is a culmination of years of hurt and pain and anger and thus defensiveness.
I don't know, guys. I'm not sure if I can apologize for not spending another $100, $200, $300, $500 of various people's time sitting and engineering a workaround to a product that, no matter the result, nobody should buy.
This, again, is a horrible look.
Right. So Christopher Yee is saying what I'm saying. I wonder if he's a fellow Hapa brother. Kind of looks like it. All right. Well, let's actually adjourn there. And when I come back, it'll be part 2, in which I review this whole drama and evaluate eventually his apology video. And until then, take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.